Hey guys, it's Zach back with another review, this time of the Thunderobot ML9 Mini. It's a bit more green than it shows up here on this camera shot, which is actually a unique colorway that I've had a hard time coming by. This mouse is very short, very claw focused, and it models itself after a couple of other back hump legends. But what is a Thunderobot, and can this mouse actually be good? Let's find out. So here we have it, the Thunderobot ML9 Mini. It's a mouse that's actually been out for around a year, but this is a different version of it that I've not seen before. It has this vibrant green colorway, which I'm a huge fan of. As we always say, we need more green mice. It is very short, definitely a claw-focused back hump mouse. Again, sort of after the shape of like an X2H Mini, or the, I don't know, maybe I'd call it a cult classic, Corsair MM712, which was never really brought into the current realm of technology. This is a $33.95, 8K polling. With that, let's jump into some product pages real quick to show the details between this and the other ML9 Mini that exists. So looking at the Envision store, which is the only place I can seem to find this colorway as well as the red in this version of the mouse, comes in at $56, which I think we'll come to see as a reasonable price for the mouse. Again, at $33.95, this is the PAR 2862 MCU. Does not make any mention of or use the Neuralink, which is part of the other one we'll talk about here shortly. Dual 8K polling, comes in the mid 50s, and this one actually has Kale white blade switches, which I am typically a fan of, as well as a WebDriver. Jumping over to the ML9 Mini that's more widely available, they asked the ML9 Mini Pro. This one comes in at $76. Does have a different red and orange colorway that looked nothing like the ones you just saw there, not metallic. This, however, had a $39.50, still had 8K wireless, but notably had the BS2825 for Neuralink connection, and I believe the performance on that was questionable last time I checked. It was also a fair amount heavier, definitely over the weight range you'd want a smaller mouse to be, and most notably not listed here, it was rocking, there it is, Raisha Opticals, one of my least favorite switches, so very happy to have gotten this version here without the potential issues of Neuralink and with the Kale white blades and the lighter weight. Coming back to the mouse itself, let's jump right into the implementation. So for those Kale white blades here, they are extremely spammable, very crisp clicks. As you can see here, a bit of pre-travel, a bit of post-travel, but that does not take away from the spammability of the click. I'm trying to think of a way to sort of rate spammability of switches because it's something I talk about a lot. I've been debating adding a CPS test. Let me know what you think about that. The problem I see with a CPS test is my performance on those varies greatly just based off of when I take the test, how I'm feeling, how I'm doing. So I'm not sure how consistent it would be, but perhaps an average of 10 tries of different mice around the same time would be accurate. I would say the actuation of these is to the medium lighter side, maybe leaning to the medium. And as you can see here, almost zero side-to-side play, very well implemented clicks. No complaints from me, and were very enjoyable for me both in aim training and in game. The scroll wheel here is this knurled rubber, and it's very nice to the touch. No weird like bowing or caving out of the rubber when you click in on the scroll wheel. The steps are defined, but they're on the lighter side, and the mouse wheel is also on the quieter side. And the clicks, which feels like a larger switch, are extremely spammable. This scroll wheel is a mega pass for me. I don't usually talk about scroll wheels in this much depth, but I really enjoy this scroll wheel for what it's worth. I think it matches the aesthetic of the mouse nicely. Coming to the side buttons here, and really this side view emphasizes how like chopped off and short this mouse is. It comes in at under 115 millimeters, but it does feel a bit longer in hand like the X2H Mini because of that back hump and how it locks you in. Anyway, these side buttons, the back one larger than the front one, they are pretty centrally placed, but I don't think you'll have too much of a problem just based off the overall size of the mouse. These are pretty good. They're glossy black, which I appreciate the gloss on there. They rebound very nicely, and they're very easy to spam. There's a little bit of post-travel, but nothing too crazy. Barely any pre-travel. Not a lot of side-to-side play either. So overall, the side buttons are pretty darn well implemented. Honestly, this is my first mouse I've tested for Thunderobot, and the implementation has been pretty impressive so far. Coming to the coating on the mouse, it's very, very similar to like the LSC800 and just a lot of other metallic coatings. It's a little bit on the slicker side. It does warm up and get grippy in use, but it's not the grippiest, probably about a 7 out of 10. There's nothing that really stands out about the coating, but it's also not a detriment to the mouse. And I'll take that slight trade-off in grippiness for this awesome green colorway. No integrity passes with flying colors, not detecting too much. Should be a little bit of flex if you really press hard on the side. Here on the right-hand side, nothing to be found up front. We're not caving in with the Saber Pro V2 here on the back, and not a shred of cave-in here on the bottom. So good build quality, and with that, we will transition to the bottom of the mouse. I had someone ask in the short what this was all about, and I noticed that in the ML9 Mini Pro, which probably uses the same overall shell for the most part, there's a charging base that is not included with this. You only have this actually unique to me 8K dongle here, distinctively not the Neuralink connection for the ML9 Mini, not the Pro. So again, no base, which is the explanation for this part of the mouse. The skate design is odd. I guess it fits the aesthetic of the mouse. I don't have a lot to say about these stock skates. They're fine. If I were to main this mouse long term, I would probably replace them with dots. As you can see here, they're not the thickest, but they're not super thin either. Not the most rounded, but there is rounding there. In use, they were just like a stock skate is how I would describe them. They weren't a detriment to my gameplay, but they definitely did not really enhance it. And on a mouse in the budget range, I'm never too mad about that. Beside that, you also see the nice hip flare here on the back and taper down to the front with a little bit of flare out. And again, that very flat, chopped off design here in the front with sensor placement on this mouse being pretty darn central. So overall, the implementation of this mouse mouse is really good. I don't really have any strong complaints. The weakest part is probably the coating maybe, and perhaps these side buttons could protrude a little bit more from the shell, but I didn't have any really issues reaching them in game. And with the little piece of grip tape that I use here on the back right, this mouse stayed locked in. The shape as well, just with how back hump dominant it is, allows you to lock in really easy. I sort of pull back here on the front of the mouse, which locks my grip in, but doesn't accidentally actuate the switches. This is the grip that I use actually in game on the mouse. So overall, for my first experience with Thunderobot, which I really didn't know what I was getting into, I came away pretty impressed. Jumping into a quick Eloshapes comparison here because I do not have the MM712 on hand, you can see this actually weighs about the same as that mouse did, and it lists it as 2mm shorter, but in reality, that's just, I think, the design of the mouse. Because of the chopped off front here on the ML9 Mini, and the way these clicks sort of peaked here on the MM712, that is the main difference. I do wish I had it in hand because you can see there does appear to be some curvature changes here and more of a flare on the front, so it's definitely not a one-to-one. There's also just like a ever so slightly higher profile to the hump and the top middle of the mouse on the MM712, so it's not a one-to-one clone, but it definitely gives me the vibes of that. And then here's a quick look at the X2H Mini, which I do have for a comparison here in a second, but as you can see, the sides and the X2H Mini here are a little bit flatter. There's a distinctive flare out here on the front of the ML9, and it's a little bit wider in the front, and the back hump is a little more pronounced here on the X2H Mini, but let's take a look at that on the actual mice. So first up here, we do have an X2H Mini comparison, and the big stark difference I want to show you is how the front of the X2H, much narrower, super apparent from this view. Overall hump profile, similar, but more of a taper down here from top hump to front, where we have a higher click height and less of a taper, more filling in the top middle part here. Another point I want to emphasize here, it's a more gradual taper from this max back width here down to like the waist of the mouse on the ML9. So where my thumb rests is a little bit farther back, whereas on the X2H Mini, you can see how much more quickly this taper occurs, which this on the other side is where my thumb rests right here on the strong taper. So on the X2H Mini, my thumb rests on this narrower part, where on the ML9, it rests a little bit farther back on the wider part. So if you like to grip on a narrower, more central waist part of the mouse, that's easier to achieve here on the X2H Mini, even with that slightly higher back hump, because of how that flare and taper is more defined and sudden from the back to the middle of the mouse. And then again, in hand, it's very apparent how the width here in the front does not compare and very stark. You can sort of see from this angle how the mouse comes to the waist and then works its way back out on both sides, which is very different from the X2H Mini. Similar mice, similar ideas here, but there are some pretty stark differences in hand. I think overall I perform similarly with these mice in game because they actually weigh within a couple grams of each other. The like shape concept here is similar with the back hump locking you in. I, for my hands, think that the X2H Mini is a little bit more comfortable. That's not to say I didn't have a very enjoyable time on this mouse, and I do like the implementation of the ML9 a lot better. Don't love the ratios in the X2H Mini. The scroll wheel is a little bit stiffer on these. Side button's a little bit smaller, a little more pre-travel. These skates I wouldn't worry about. The stock skates are about equivalent between these two mice. A little bit better rounding on a Pulsar mouse. Obviously this is out of season, and when the X2H Crazylight comes out here hopefully soon in the mini form, that will have like 20 grams probably, maybe at least 15 on the ML9 Mini, and then you'll have a decision to make between stability and the most lightweight mouse you can get. I bring the Scyrox V8 out here only because A, it gets clicks. Just kidding. It's a very popular mouse, but it is like an X2H Mini, but a little bit longer, and you can see that here from the side. That slight added bit of length really does pronounce the stark drop off here from the back to the front, but the rest of the properties of the mouse are very similar. As you can see, we taper down here and stay pretty much straight to the front of the mouse. Again, as well on the Scyrox V8. I may have said Scyrox, whatever, sue me. And again, just very apparent how much taller throughout the front of the mouse this is. So if that's your preference, do take note. More for size reference, this is like the X2 Mini. This is actually the M-Cho's L7 Pro, but it's an X2 Mini shape more or less. And it's pretty obvious how much more rear hump bias this ML9 Mini is. But the overall shape of these, and I know this feels very small in my hand, is pretty similar. This feels more filling because this bulbous back hump sort of like sets your whole hand back a little bit further. You can see how far my fingers hang over the edge here on the ML9. And then on the X2 Mini shape, my fingers are even further over the front with my weird forward grip. So very similarly sized mice. Again, still taller here in the mid in front of the mouse, more rear hump bias, and overall similar length. And of course, if you don't know, the X2 is a very flat mouse as far as the sides go. That's where my other ultralight ice skates went. Who knew? And as far as the price goes in this mouse, again, you see it comes in at $55. I don't think that's a bad value at all. It's $15 cheaper than Scyrox and also about 15 grams heavier. So if you like a mouse of this shape with a rear anchor, smaller size, but you want more stability with that weight, sort of like the X2H Mini, this is priced pretty competitively. It's got a sick colorway. There aren't really any major drawbacks in the implementation that I found as far as performance. Again, not top tier, but good. And just the overall like QC implementation of the mouse was very impressive. If you're looking for that MM712-ish shape with a bit more flair, or something like the X2H Mini that doesn't get as narrow here in the front, I think this is a good value. It's not the best value in the world. I'm not knocking down windows and doors on Black Friday to get this mouse, but I also would not hesitate recommending this to anybody who had interest in it and wanted to pick it up. It's a good mouse. with a cool colorway at a fair price. The WebDriver for the mouse, which is appreciated as a WebDriver, is a bit buggy. It took me a couple of times to get back in here, coming back to do the recording here after initial setup. As you can see here, it's not the most responsive on the first click, but going over here to DPI, you can set your polling rate anywhere from 125 to 8000. The only LED settings on this 3395 or 1 or 2 millimeters. And of course, you can change your DPI, set your macros, and then for the device itself, you can drop debounce to 0 on these mechanical switches. There's angle snap, ripple control, and motion sync, all of which I had off. And those are the only performance settings for the mouse. I will add the link for this driver in the description should you buy this mouse. It was hard for me to come by. It is on thunderobot.com/ML903 Mini 8K. So weight-wise, completely stock. We get the ML9 Mini coming in at 57.1 grams. So assume that 54 gram advertised weight is probably without skates. That compares to this X2H Mini with some dots on it, coming in at 52.6 grams. And of course, the ultra lightweight Scyrox V8, which comes in around 39 grams. And that's with some grip tape on the side, as well as dot skates. Honestly, this only feels a little bit heavier than the X2H Mini in hand. The weight wasn't really a detriment to me, but we are creeping a little bit high on the scale for weight when it comes to this small of a mouse. We could shrink the battery if we wanted to get it lighter. In use, the weight didn't bother me, but again, not the most lightweight of mice. Lastly, here we will grab some measurements. We get the max back flare on this ML9 Mini around 62.9 millimeters, whereas that max back flare on the X2H Mini is only 62.2. One note here as well, the minimum taper on the ML9 Mini is a lot farther forward on the mouse. Again, we get narrow here more quickly on the X2H Mini. That further forward narrow waist point is 54 millimeters on the ML9, which about compares to the 54.2 on the X2H Mini. Front of the mouse, before we begin to taper down here on the X2H Mini, is about 55.1 millimeters, which is a stark contrast to the wider 56.4 millimeters found on the ML9. I do get a max back hump height of about 37.3 millimeters for the ML9, which about matches the X2H Mini. Oddly enough, 37.3 isn't super high. These do have nice humps, but the real reason they feel so claw focused is because of the back hump placement, not necessarily the height of the hump itself. So that about wraps it up for my thoughts on the Thunderobot ML9 Mini. It's a very solid offering, and while not the lightest mouse, it does do pretty well in most areas of implementation, and I'll say it's a solid pickup if you're a fan of both the colorway and mechanical clicks. Its similarities to the X2H Mini and the Corsair MM712 are definitely pluses in my book for what my preferences are, and I'd definitely like to see Thunderobot go a little bit more lightweight in the future. Please subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. You can check me out on X at DasherZach, as well as joining up on my Discord server. Check out the Mousecast podcast. We go live once a week, and with that, we'll see you.